Blood streaked down Cordelia's white apron as she pressed her trembling hands against the wounded prospector's chest, watching helplessly as life ebbed from his eyes. The afternoon sun beat mercilessly on the dusty stagecoach stop, and the metallic scent of death mingled with sage and desert wind. "Another one lost," she whispered, her voice cracking as she pulled the blanket over the man's face. 3 men had been brought to her makeshift medical station in the past week, all shot, all dying, all whispering the same name before they passed: Valencio Draven. The world tilted suddenly, black spots dancing before her vision. Her legs gave out, and she crumpled beside the wooden bench where she'd been treating patients. The heat, the blood, the endless parade of death, it was too much. Consciousness slipped away like sand through fingers. When awareness returned, she found herself cradled against a broad chest that smelled of leather and gunpowder. Strong arms held her steady as a canteen touched her lips. "Easy there, Angel," a deep voice rumbled above her. "Drink slow." Cordelia's eyes fluttered open to meet the most intense gaze she'd ever encountered, storm-gray eyes beneath the brim of a black hat. The man's face was all sharp angles and dangerous beauty, with a scar running from his left temple to his jaw. "Who?" she began, but he cut her off. "Name's Kieran Blackthorne. And you're coming with me." Before she could protest, he lifted her effortlessly to her feet. The world swayed again, but his steadying hand remained firm on her waist. "I'm not going anywhere," she managed, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "These people need me. I'm the only nurse for 50 miles. Kieran's eyes swept over the blood-stained station, taking in the covered bodies and the fear etched on the faces of the few remaining travelers. "What these people need is to get out of Valencio Draven's crosshairs, same as you." The name sent ice through her veins. "You know about Draven? Know about him?" Kieran's laugh held no humor. "Lady, I've been tracking that murdering snake across 3 territories. Every town he hits, he leaves behind a pile of bodies and a calling card." He gestured toward the covered corpses. "This is his work." Cordelia's hand went instinctively to the silver locket at her throat, her grandmother's last gift before the influenza took her. Inside was a photograph and a secret that could destroy powerful men, a secret Draven would kill for. "He's not just killing randomly," she whispered, pieces clicking into place. "He's looking for something, someone." Kieran studied her face with those penetrating eyes. "And I'm betting that someone is you." As if summoned by their words, the thunder of approaching hoofbeats echoed across the desert. Dust clouds rose on the horizon, riders, moving fast and with deadly purpose. "Time's up, Angel," Kieran said, his hand moving to the pearl-handled Colt at his hip. "Those aren't friendly visitors, and this ramshackle station won't hold them for 5 minutes." Cordelia looked at the wounded men who still breathed, at the terrified families huddled in whatever shade they could find. Running meant abandoning them to certain death. "I won't leave them," she said firmly. Kieran's scarred face softened almost imperceptibly. "Then we make our stand here. But when the smoke clears, you're still coming with me. Because staying in one place will get you killed, and I didn't track Draven this far to watch him claim another innocent." The hoofbeats grew louder, and Cordelia felt her world shifting like sand in a storm. The first shot shattered the morning silence, splintering wood from the station's support beam inches from Cordelia's head. She dove behind an overturned water trough as Kieran's guns cleared leather with deadly precision. "Stay down," he commanded, his voice cutting through the chaos as return fire erupted from his twin Colts. Cordelia watched in awe as the mysterious gunslinger moved like death incarnate. Each shot found its mark with mechanical precision, never wasted, never hurried. 3 of Draven's men dropped before they could properly take cover. "The woman!" shouted a voice from behind the corral. "Draven wants her alive." "Over my dead body," Kieran growled, reloading with practiced speed. He glanced at Cordelia, his storm-gray eyes blazing. How many bullets you got in that little hideout gun? Cordelia's hand went to the derringer tucked in her medical bag, a gift from her late father. 4. Make them count. A bearded outlaw broke from cover, rushing toward their position. Cordelia's small gun bucked in her hand, and the man pitched forward into the dust. The satisfaction that coursed through her was both thrilling and terrifying. "Good shot, Angel," Kieran said, genuine admiration in his voice. "Now we move." He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the station's back room just as another volley of shots peppered their former position. Inside, wounded men lay on makeshift cots, their eyes wide with terror. "There's a root cellar," gasped one of the injured, a young cowboy with a leg wound. "Behind the flour barrels," Kieran nodded grimly. "Get them down there, all of them." As Cordelia helped the wounded to safety, Kieran stood guard at the window. His face was a mask of controlled fury as he watched the remaining attackers regroup. "Why are you helping me?" she whispered when they had a moment's respite. "You don't even know me." Kieran was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was raw with old pain. "Had a sister once. About your age, with the same stubborn streak and healing hands. Draven killed her because she wouldn't tell him where I was hiding." The words hit Cordelia like a physical blow. "I'm sorry. Been hunting him for 3 years. Every trail goes cold. Every lid turns to dust. Until now." His eyes found hers. "Whatever you're carrying, whatever secrets got him so interested, it's the key to ending this." Cordelia's fingers trembled as she touched the locket. "My grandmother was a midwife in Kansas. She delivered children for some very important men. Men who weren't married to the mothers." Understanding dawned in Kieran's eyes, and she kept records. Names, dates, everything. "She made me promise to keep it safe, to use it only if I had no other choice." Cordelia's voice broke. "I think that choice has been made for me." A new voice cut through the air-cultured, snake-smooth, and infinitely dangerous. "Miss Cordelia Ashworth. I know you're in there. Come out peacefully and I'll let your protector live. Valencio Draven." Even through the walls, his voice sent shivers down her spine. Kieran's jaw tightened. "He's lying. The moment you show yourself, we're both dead. But if you don't, we find another way." His hand touched her cheek gently, calloused fingers surprisingly tender. "Trust me, Angel. I've been waiting 3 years for this moment. I'm not about to let it slip away now." From outside came the sound of approaching horses' reinforcements arriving. Cordelia's heart sank as she realized they were trapped, outnumbered, with nowhere to run. But Kieran smiled, and it was the most dangerous thing she'd ever seen. "Time to even the odds," he murmured, reaching into his saddlebags to produce a stick of dynamite. "Hope you're not afraid of loud noises, Angel." The explosion shook the entire station, sending up a pillar of smoke and flame that could be seen for miles. Kieran's dynamite had found its target, the water tower that overlooked the corral, and now burning. Debris rained down on Draven's remaining men like the wrath of God. In the chaos that followed, Kieran grabbed Cordelia's hand and sprinted toward the stables where his midnight black stallion waited. "Can you ride?" he shouted over the screaming of wounded men and frightened horses. "Like I was born to it," she replied, surprising him with her fierce determination. They swung onto his horse together, her arms circling his waist as he spurred the stallion into a gallop. Behind them, Valencio Draven's voice rose in furious command, but his words were lost in the thunder of hoofbeats and the crackling of flames. The desert stretched endlessly before them, red rock formations jutting skyward like ancient sentinels. Kieran guided his horse through narrow canyons and hidden passes with the skill of a man who'd spent years running from and hunting dangerous prey. When they finally stopped to rest at a hidden spring sheltered by towering stone walls, the sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon. Cordelia slid from the saddle, her legs trembling from the hard ride and the aftermath of battle. We can't stay here long, Kieran said, though his eyes lingered on her face with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Draven's got trackers. Good ones. Cordelia knelt by the spring, cupping the cool water in her hands to splash her dust-caked face. When she looked up, she found Kieran watching her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Tell me about your sister, she said softly. Pain flickered across his scarred features. Melody, she was. Everything good in this world. Ran a school for orphan children in a little town called Haven's Rest. When Draven came looking for me, she wouldn't give up my location. His hands clenched into fists. He burned the school with her inside it. And the children? She got them out first. Died making sure every last one was safe. Kieran's voice broke slightly. That was Melody, always putting others before herself. Cordelia rose and moved toward him, drawn by an impulse she didn't fully understand. She sounds like someone I would have liked to know. She would have liked you too. Had the same fire in her eyes when she was determined to help someone. His gaze searched her face. What I said back there about you coming with me, I meant it. But not just to keep you safe from Draven. What do you mean? Kieran's hand reached up to touch the scar on his face, a gesture that seemed unconscious. I've been alone for 3 years, focused on nothing but revenge. But when I saw you collapse at that station, when I held you, he trailed off, shaking his head. When you held me, what? Cordelia pressed, stepping closer until she could see the flecks of silver in his gray eyes. When I held you, it was the first time since Melody died that I remembered what it felt like to want to protect something precious. His voice was barely above a whisper. What it felt like to hope for something beyond vengeance. The air between them seemed charged with electricity. Cordelia found herself reaching up to trace the scar on his cheek, her touch feather-light. You saved my life, she murmured. More than that, you gave me a choice. Stay and die, or fight for something better. And what's your choice, Angel? Instead of answering with words, she rose on her tiptoes and pressed her lips to his. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but when his arms came around her, it deepened into something that spoke of desperate hope and shared danger. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. That's my choice, she whispered against his lips. But their moment of peace was shattered by the distant sound of howling, not wolves, but Draven's tracking dogs. The outlaw had found their trail. Kieran's expression hardened back into the dangerous mask she'd first seen. Time to go. But Cordelia ... He cupped her face in his hands. Whatever happens next, know that you've already given me something I thought I'd lost forever. What's that? A reason to live through this. As they mounted his stallion again, Cordelia felt the weight of her grandmother's locket against her chest. The secrets it contained could destroy powerful men, but perhaps with Kieran beside her, they could also set them both free. The abandoned mine shaft loomed before them like a mouth in the mountainside, dark and foreboding against the star-strewn sky. Kieran had led them through treacherous trails to reach this forgotten place, his stallion picking its way carefully along paths that hadn't seen travelers in years. We'll be safe here until dawn, he said, helping Cordelia down from the horse. Draven's dogs won't track through running water, and there's an underground stream that runs through this mountain. Inside the mine, Kieran struck a match and lit a makeshift torch from an old timber. The flickering light revealed abandoned mining equipment and cart tracks disappearing into darkness. But it was warm and dry as sanctuary in the hostile wilderness. As Kieran tended to his horse and checked their supplies, Cordelia finally found the courage to remove her grandmother's locket. The silver was worn smooth by generations of hands, but the mechanism still worked with a soft click. It's time you saw what Draven is willing to kill for, she said quietly. Kieran turned at the sound of her voice, his eyes drawn to the small photograph she held. But it wasn't the faded image of her grandmother that made his breath catch. It was the folded paper beneath it, covered in spidery handwriting. Birth records, Cordelia explained, but not ordinary ones. These are children, born to unmarried women who were paid handsomely to disappear afterward. Her finger traced the careful notations. The fathers' names are all here. Senators, judges, businessmen who built empires on lies. Kieran studied the document with growing amazement. There must be 20 names here, maybe more. 23. Cordelia confirmed, including Territory Judge Cornelius Winthrop, the man who sentenced your sister's killer to hang, then mysteriously commuted the sentence to life imprisonment. The torch flickered, casting dancing shadows on Kieran's scarred face. Winthrop let Melody's murderer live? According to grandmother's records, Judge Winthrop has a son born out of wedlock. A son who would destroy his political career if the truth came out. Cordelia's voice was heavy with the weight of revelation. That son is 26 years old now. A hired gun who goes by the name Valencio Draven. The torch slipped from Kieran's numb fingers, clattering to the stone floor. In the sudden darkness, his voice was raw with fury and pain. Draven is the judge's son, and Winthrop let him walk free to protect his own reputation. More than that, Cordelia whispered, lighting another torch with trembling hands. Grandmother's final entry mentions a contract. Draven was hired by his own father to eliminate anyone who might know the truth about his parentage. He's been cleaning up his father's secrets, one murder at a time. Kieran was silent for a long moment, his hands clenched so tightly his knuckles showed white. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm. How many people has he killed to keep this secret? Too many. Cordelia moved closer, her hand finding his arm. But it ends now. With this evidence, we can destroy them both. No, Kieran said, his eyes blazing in the torchlight. We can do more than that. We can make them face justice, real justice, not the corrupt kind that let my sister's killer walk. Free. He pulled her close, his lips finding hers in a kiss that tasted of desperation and determination. When they broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. You realize what this means, don't you? He murmured. Once we use this evidence, there'll be no going back. Powerful men will want us dead. Cordelia's smile was fierce and beautiful in the flickering light. Then we'd better make sure we're too dangerous to kill. And after? When the dust settles and the truth comes out, what then? She traced the scar on his face with gentle fingers. Then we find out if a gunslinger and a nurse can build something beautiful from the ashes of revenge. Outside the mine, the wind howled through the mountain passes, carrying with it the distant sound of pursuit. Draven was still coming, but now they had something he didn't know. They possessed the truth about his identity and the power to destroy the corrupt empire. Built on his father's lies. As they settled down to wait for dawn, Kieran wrapped his coat around Cordelia's shoulders and pulled her against his chest. She could hear his heartbeat, strong and steady, a rhythm that spoke of hope instead of hatred. Whatever happens tomorrow, she whispered into the darkness, I'm glad you found me. So am I, Angel, he replied, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. So am I. Dawn broke gray and cold over the town of Retribution, a ramshackle settlement that clung to the mountainside like a scar on the landscape. Kieran and Cordelia rode down the main street as early morning mist swirled around there. Horses' hooves, drawing suspicious stares from the few souls brave enough to be out so early. This place has a reputation, Kieran murmured as they passed a saloon with bullet holes in its swinging doors. Folks come here when they've got nowhere else to run. Cordelia studied the weathered faces peering at them from behind grimy windows. Then we should fit right in. They stopped at the telegraph office, a crooked building squeezed between a gunsmith and an undertaker. The irony wasn't lost on either of them. Inside, a nervous clerk with wire-rimmed spectacles looked up from his desk. His eyes widened when he saw the trail dust on their clothes and the hard set of Kieran's jaw. "Need to send a message, Kieran." Sighed, laying coins on the counter. Multiple copies to different territories. As Cordelia dictated the contents of her grandmother's records, the clerk's face grew progressively paler. By the time she finished listing the names and dates, his hands were shaking so badly he could barely hold his pencil. "Sir, this information ... if it's true ... It's true," Cordelia said firmly. "And by sundown, every newspaper from here to San Francisco will have a copy." They stepped back into the street to find a crowd gathering. Word traveled fast in small towns, and the sight of strangers always drew attention. But this felt different. There was tension in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes. "Kieran Blackthorne." The voice cut through the morning air like a blade. At the far end of the street, Valencio Draven sat astride a pure white stallion, flanked by 6 of the deadliest-looking men Cordelia had ever seen. Even at a distance, she could feel the malevolent intelligence in his dark eyes. "Been expecting you," Draven called out, his cultured voice carrying easily in the thin mountain air. "Though I admit, I thought you'd be harder to track down." Kieran's hand moved to his gun, but didn't draw. "Let me guess, you've got men positioned on every roof, ready to cut us down the moment I clear leather." Draven's laugh was like poisoned honey. "Oh, much better than that. I've got something you want." He gestured, and 2 of his men dragged forward a small figure, a woman with graying hair and a bloodied face. Cordelia gasped. "Mrs. Patterson." The elderly woman who ran the boarding house where Cordelia had been staying lifted her head, her eyes focusing on her young friend with difficulty. "I'm sorry, dear," she croaked. "They made me tell them where you'd gone." "Now," Draven said, his voice taking on a reasonable tone, "I propose a trade. The woman for that pretty little locket your companion is wearing." Kieran stepped protectively in front of Cordelia. "You're wasting your time, Draven. The information's already been sent." "Has it?" Draven smiled, and the expression was terrifying. "Funny thing about telegraph lines, they're so easily cut." "And that nervous little clerk?" "He's been on my payroll for months." The crowd that had gathered began to back away, sensing violence in the air. Doors slammed shut, and window shutters closed with sharp reports like gunshots. "So here's what's going to happen," Draven continued. "Miss Ashworth is going to walk down this street nice and slow and hand over that locket. Then you're both going to climb on that horse and ride out of here. In return, I let the old woman live. And if we refuse?" Kieran asked. Draven drew his pearl-handled revolver and pressed it against Mrs. Patterson's temple. "Then I paint this street with innocent blood, starting with her." Cordelia felt the weight of the locket around her neck. 3 generations of secrets, the power to bring down corrupt men, the evidence that could finally give Kieran justice for his sister. All of it balanced against one old woman's life. She started to reach for the clasp, but Kieran's hand closed over hers. "There's another option," he said quietly, his eyes never leaving Draven's face. "I call you out, right here, right now. Just you and me." Draven's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. "A duel? How wonderfully old-fashioned." "Winner takes all," Kieran continued. "You win, you get the locket, and we ride away." "I win ... I wouldn't worry about that," Draven purred. "I've killed 47 men in fair fights. What makes you think you'll be any different?" Kieran's smile was cold as winter steel. "Because I've got something you don't." "And what's that?" Kieran glanced at Cordelia, his storm-gray eyes soft with an emotion that took her breath away. "Something worth living for." The 2 men stepped into the street, and Cordelia felt her world balance on the edge of a knife. The sun climbed toward its zenith as the 2 gunfighters faced each other in the dusty street. Retribution had become a ghost town in minutes, every door barred, every window shuttered tight. Only the wind moved, stirring dust devils between the two men who stood 20 paces apart. Valencio Draven cut an impressive figure in his tailored black coat and polished boots. Everything about him spoke of wealth and refinement, from his perfectly oiled mustache to the pearl handles of his custom revolvers. He looked like a gentleman, which made his capacity for evil all the more chilling. Kieran, by contrast, was a creature of the frontier. His worn leather coat bore the scars of 100 campfires. His boots were caked with the dust of a dozen territories, and his twin colts showed the honest wear of constant use. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had first captured Cordelia's attention, burned with unshakable resolve. "I must admit," Draven said conversationally, "I'm curious about something. What made you think you could succeed where so many others failed? Maybe it's because I'm not doing this for money or glory." Kieran replied, his voice carrying clearly in the thin air. "I'm doing it for love." Draven's laugh was like breaking glass. "Love? How delightfully naive. Love won't make your hand faster or your aim truer, won't it?" Kieran's gaze flicked briefly to where Cordelia stood pressed against the telegraph office window. "I've got news for you, Draven. A man with something worth protecting fights harder than one with nothing to lose. We'll see." The ritual began with the ancient formality of the frontier. Each man checked his weapons, ensuring chambers were loaded, and actions were smooth. Mrs. Patterson whimpered softly where Draven's men held her, but neither gunfighter paid her any attention. This moment existed outside of time, in a space where only skill and will mattered. "When you're ready," called out a voice from somewhere in the shadowed doorways. Draven settled into his stance, feet planted wide, coat pushed back to reveal his pearl-handled guns. His face was a mask of cold confidence. This was a ritual he'd performed dozens of times before, always with the same outcome. Kieran stood differently, more relaxed, his hands hanging loose at his sides. But Cordelia could see the coiled tension in every line of his body, like a spring compressed to its breaking point. The seconds stretched into eternity. A crow cawed somewhere overhead. The wind rattled a loose shutter. Cordelia held her breath until her lungs burned. Then Draven moved. His hands flashed to his guns with serpentine speed, pearl handles clearing leather in a blur of motion. The man was faster than anyone had a right to be. His revolvers came up with practiced precision, hammers cocking as the barrels swung toward Kieran's chest. But Kieran was faster. His Colts appeared in his hands as if by magic, muzzles flashing fire before Draven's guns had finished their arc. The sound was like thunder echoing off the surrounding mountains, 4 shots so close together they almost sounded like one. Draven stood frozen for a heartbeat, his unfired gun still pointing at empty air. Then he looked down at the spreading crimson stains on his pristine white shirt. His pearl-handled revolvers slipped from nerveless fingers, clattering to the dirt. "Impossible," he whispered, sinking to his knees. "I've never been beaten. Kieran walked forward, his smoking gun still ready. "You made one mistake, Draven. You thought this was about who was faster." He stopped just out of reach, his scarred face hard as granite. It was about who was fighting for the right reasons. Draven's head tilted back, his eyes finding Cordelia's face in the window. "The locket won't change anything. Too many powerful men involved." "Maybe," Kieran said quietly, "but at least they'll know someone's watching, someone who isn't afraid to fight." Valencio Draven, the man who had terrorized 3 territories and murdered countless innocents, toppled forward into the dust of Retribution's main street. The son of Judge Winthrop would never kill again. Draven's surviving men looked at their fallen leader, then at the smoking guns in Kieran's hands. Without a word, they released Mrs. Patterson and spurred their horses out of town, disappearing into the mountain passes like the cowards they'd always been. Cordelia burst from the telegraph office and ran to Kieran, throwing her arms around him as he holstered his weapons. He held her tight, his face buried in her hair, both of them trembling with the aftermath of violence and the relief of survival. "Is it over?" she whispered against his chest. "This part is," he replied, his voice rough with emotion. "But we've got work to do. That locket of yours is going to shake the foundations of this territory." She pulled back to look at his face, seeing not the deadly gunfighter who just faced down the most feared killer in the West, but the man who'd chosen love over revenge. "Together?" she asked. "Together," he confirmed, sealing the promise with a kiss that tasted of hope and new beginnings. 6 months later, the town of Haven's Rest rose from its ashes like a phoenix reborn. Where Valencio Draven had once burned a school and murdered an innocent woman, new buildings stretched toward the sky: a school, a church, a medical clinic, and homes for the families who had come seeking fresh starts. Cordelia stood in the doorway of her clinic, watching Kieran supervise the construction of their house on the hill overlooking the growing town. He'd traded his gunfighter's reputation for a sheriff's badge, though the twin Colts still rode at his hip. Some habits died hard, and there were still bad men in the world who needed reminding that justice had a long memory. The scandal that followed the revelation of her grandmother's records had been every bit as explosive as they'd hoped. Judge Winthrop had fled the territory in disgrace, his political career destroyed and his corrupt network of cronies scattered to the winds. 3 senators had resigned, a dozen business deals had collapsed, and the territorial governor himself had been forced to call for new elections, but the most satisfying outcome had been smaller, more personal. The man who had actually murdered Kieran's sister, the killer Winthrop had protected, now sat in a federal prison, finally paying for his crimes. Justice, Cordelia had learned, sometimes moved slowly, but it was worth the wait. "Mrs. Blackthorne?" Cordelia turned to find young Timothy Fletcher standing in her clinic doorway, clutching a bouquet of wildflowers in his small fist. At 8 years old, he was one of the first children to enroll in Haven's Rest's new school, and he'd taken a special shine to the town's gentle nurse. "These are for you," he said shyly, holding out the flowers. "Mama says you saved my baby sister's life when she had the fever." Cordelia knelt down to accept the gift, her heart swelling with warmth. "Thank you, Timothy. They're beautiful. But you know, saving lives is what I'm supposed to do." "Sheriff Kieran says you're the best nurse in 3 territories," Timothy said seriously. "And he's real smart, so it must be true." From outside came the sound of Kieran's laughter, deep and genuine, nothing like the cold fury she'd first heard in his voice. He appeared in the doorway, his shirt sleeves rolled up and sawdust in his dark hair. "Someone taking my name in vain?" he asked, ruffling Timothy's hair. "Just telling Mrs. Blackthorne how smart you are," the boy replied with perfect innocence. "Wise beyond your years, Tim," Kieran said with mock solemnity. "Now run along home before your mama starts worrying." As Timothy scampered away, Kieran pulled Cordelia into his arms, spinning her around until she laughed with pure joy. When he set her down, his eyes, those storm-gray eyes that had seen so much pain and death, were bright with happiness. "How's the house coming along?" she asked, smoothing the sawdust from his hair. "Foundation solid, walls are going up straight, and the roof should be on by week's end," he reported. "Though I might need the town's best nurse to patch up a few scraped knuckles. I think that can be arranged." She rose on her tiptoes to kiss him, tasting sunshine and hope and the promise of all their tomorrows. "Cordelia," he said when they broke apart, his voice suddenly serious, "do you ever regret it? Giving up your quiet life to tangle with gunfighters and corrupt judges?" She looked out over the bustling town, watching families build new lives from the ground up. Children played in the streets where violence had once ruled. The sound of construction mixed with laughter and conversation, the soundtrack of hope. "Never," she said firmly. "Besides, what kind of life would that have been? Safe, maybe, but empty. This," she gestured toward their growing community, "this is what I was meant for. What we were meant for." Huron's arms tightened around her. "Even if it means sharing your husband with every desperate soul who needs a lawman's help?" "Especially then," she replied. "Melody would be proud, you know." Her brother, building something beautiful instead of just hunting down the things that destroyed it. The name of his murdered sister no longer brought only pain. Time and love had transformed the wound into something else, a source of strength. A reminder of why they fought for justice instead of revenge. "I love you, Angel," he murmured against her ear. "I love you too," she whispered back. "My mysterious gunslinger who swept me away from a stagecoach stop and straight into the adventure of a lifetime." As the sun set over Haven's Rest, painting the new buildings in shades of gold and crimson, Kieran and Cordelia Blackthorne stood together in the doorway of their clinic. They'd found each other in blood and violence, but they'd chosen to build their future on healing and hope. In the distance, a stagecoach approached the town, carrying new arrivals seeking fresh starts and second chances. Whatever dangers or opportunities that coach might bring, they would face them together, the gunslinger and the nurse, partners in love and life, guardians of a town that proved even the darkest past could be redeemed by the light of love and justice. Their wild love story had begun with the words, "You're coming with me," spoken in desperation and determination. Now, as they watched their community grow around them, those words had taken on new meaning, not a command born of necessity, but a promise freely given and joyfully kept. They were going forward together, and that made all the difference.